I'm Kelly Lemon.
And I'm Michael Paul Williams.
And welcome to the After the Monuments podcast, where we look at events and news about race in a historical context and see how, too often, history repeats itself. In this episode, we're getting further into the right-wing assault on public education. And for this episode, we're joined by Mary Bauer, who is the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Virginia, headquartered right here in Richmond.
Hey, Mary, how are you doing?
Doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. It's hard for me not to think of what we're going to talk about today outside of a global framework. As we're talking here, Russia's poised to invade a sovereign, fledgling democracy. In the United States, we have a political party in denial of what happened on January 6, 2021, by way of insurrection. We have a political party enthralled to a wannabe autocrat. And on the school level, it seems like we're seeing things that I would have expected in another period of time, but I'm taken aback by now. Tell me just what is the ACLU of Virginia's perspective on what's happening now as far as the talk of banning books, this drumbeat to ban books, to control the school curriculum, to control how school districts respond to the pandemic. Just what are your observations about this moment in time and what you're seeing as an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that this feels like it's coming from another era. That is like we're recycling ideas that, you know, we dealt with and kind of rejected decades ago. The Supreme Court ruled in 1982 that school boards couldn't come in and just decide that they didn't like books based on the content, right? So 40 years ago, and we're still having this fight. And it's at the school board level, and it's at the state level, and it's at the national level, and you know maybe it's beyond that. That's maybe beyond the scope of kind of my understanding, but it is clearly an attack on the idea that students should hear truthful history, right? That is what we are talking about, that students shouldn't have the right to kind of understand the real history of the United States. And that hurts. I mean, it hurts kids of color, it hurts LGBTQ kids, but I would argue it hurts all kids to not be able to hear the real history of their country and to understand kind of from whence we all came.
And Mary, you're the executive director of ACLU of Virginia. Can you talk? That is correct. Can you talk a little bit about your role? And you know, I know we are specifically talking about education, but just your role in general with ACLU.
Sure. Well, we have a team of about 25 folks, and we, you know, we consider ourselves kind of the bulwark against tyranny and oppression. And, you know, we have fought against Republicans, against Democrats. You know, we have worked with Republicans and Democrats. We have, you know, sued, you know, folks on both sides of the aisle. So we're, you know, committed to an equitable, just commonwealth in which people have the right to kind of share their views with a robust First Amendment. And so I lead a team of people who are, you know, doing a whole host of work to create that more just and equitable Virginia. And that's, you know, a team of litigators and a team of lobbyists and, you know, folks who work in our communications department who really tell the story day in and day out of what is going on in Virginia. And, you know, the ACLU of Virginia for 50 years has been kind of the resistance to administrations that are intent on violating people's civil rights and civil liberties. And that's what we do, and that's who we are.
this all, what we're experiencing in Virginia, sadly, is not unique. It appears to be part of a national playbook. Do you sense a national response from the ACLU? Are you all or many organizations throughout the nation facing these issues, and is there like a national strategy to combat them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there has definitely been this kind of drumbeat about really about school censorship across the country. And the ACLU has responded. You know, there's litigation in Oklahoma challenging their ban on critical race theory. And that's language that we try not to use because honestly, there are no public schools, K through 12, that are teaching critical race theory. This really is just about school censorship and about some kind of crazy notion that affluent white kids should never for 1 second be uncomfortable. And why this has sort of taken over at this national level, it really does feel like some, politicians decided that this would be a successful way to kind of, win elections, even if it does such a disservice to our teachers and to our schools and to, our kids who are the future, right? It does such a disservice to them that they can't read the books that they want to read, or that they can't have an honest talk and hear about the history of slavery and the Holocaust and those things that have shaped who we are as a society. It's really, politicians, using demagoguery instead of honest policies that allow kids to be educated the way they should be educated.
I don't even know how you frame legislation to eliminate discomfort. It just seems on its face. I don't know if there are legal precedents for it. It seems ludicrous. I mean, how do you create an environment where white students do not feel discomfort that does not make students of color uncomfortable, for one? It seems discriminatory on its head in what gets omitted from the school lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right, kids of color are just not going to hear the history of their, ancestors and their people, right? Absolutely. So just as an example, there's a lawsuit that was filed on behalf of a group of parents against Albemarle County schools for allegedly teaching critical race theory at the elementary school level, which is just so nutty, to be almost fanciful. But the cause of action that they bring, I just read the lawsuit. We're not, one of the parties to the lawsuit, but the idea that it was illegal discrimination under Virginia Constitution for little white kids to have to hear about race. I mean, that is the legal argument. It is so preposterous and so offensive and just, such a disservice to all of our children, right? Certainly to Black kids who don't get to hear, their true history, to, LGBT kids for whom being able to talk about some of these issues is actually truly life-saving. And, to kind of middle-class white kids who don't learn the true history of their state and in their country. It's just a disservice to the community writ large.
And again, how in a legal system, in a courtroom, in a legal, how do you define to the point that you can enforce or not enforce the term divisive concepts? I don't.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. That is such a ridiculous phrase. And I think we have to assume that the point of it is to intimidate and censor teachers from talking, because it is impossible to define that term. It's a ridiculous term. Is slavery a divisive topic? I mean, I don't know. But when you look, for example, at this governor's decision to put out a tip line against teachers and then to refuse to share that information when, Freedom of Information Act requests were submitted to actually find out what was happening pursuant to this tip line. It is a wanton effort to censor and intimidate teachers from teaching our true history.
Yeah, that just seems like something out of the Red Scare. I mean, what?
Right, and as if teachers in this moment in time didn't have enough kind of burden and pressure, like just having survived teaching through this pandemic seems, I'm in awe of what my kids' teachers do. But then to say, here's this other kind of pressure we're going to put on you that's entirely contrived, and you won't really understand what you can and can't talk about, but just know that you might get in trouble, right? And we can't tell you exactly like how and when you will get in trouble, but people are spying on you, people are watching you, right? That is not the message that teachers should be hearing at this moment, or really ever, but certainly not at this moment.
You said 50 years the ACLU has been in existence. What trends are coming back around as we talk about after the monuments? We're talking about things that were happening before the monuments came up, and now they're still happening after the monuments are coming down. What are you surprised that that is still coming back around as you're dealing with some legal and education?
Yeah, and the ACLU of Virginia has been around for 50 years, but the ACLU nationally was created in 1920, so it's really been around 100 years, and it is it's really disheartening and sometimes devastating to know that we are having the exact same fights that we've been having for these decades. I mean, you look in the area, for example, of reproductive rights. We thought that got resolved in 1973 with a very clear decision from the United States Supreme Court. And yet here we are and at a very real risk that reproductive rights are going to be taken away from women, right? That's a fight that we thought, we had reached some societal consensus. And in fact, the majority of Americans pretty solidly do support women's right to an abortion. So that's a fight we're having again. But on the issue of race, we've never really made the progress that we told ourselves we made, right? Look at the fight for school segregation or against school segregation, right? There's some narrative out there that we succeeded in that effort, right? And that schools are now integrated and robust. And you can look at look at data and see many schools. Many kids of color are going to more segregated schools than they were before Brown versus the Board of Education. So, this idea that we've succeeded, that we're in this post-racial world, right? If people ever believe that, I think this current narrative and these current efforts to say that we can't talk about these things really, gives lie to any notion that we are sort of past these issues, because we're having these same debates, these same discussions over and over and over again.
How does the battle for LGBTQ rights fit into the framework of what we're talking about? I've seen firsthand some resistance on that front also, and attempts to some backlash and attempts to turn back the clock.
Yeah, I mean, they're absolutely. And I think looking at Virginia in this last year and the attack on transgender students' rights in so many different ways, from, what bathroom do you use? I mean, that is a fight that we won years ago in the Gavin Grimm case at the Fourth Circuit. There is a very clear decision saying that transgender students have to be allowed to use the bathroom of their choosing. And yet we are fighting that fight over and over and over again, right? The right of students to participate in sports. We're having those fights over and over and over again. And again, I think it is politicians who are using this for political gain at the very profound expense of LGBTQ kids. And I would say other kids as well, right? It is a very disturbing message for adults to tell children that discrimination and mean-spiritedness and bigotry from adults is just fine, right? Like, that is a disturbing message that no kid should hear. And yet that is the message that many of our school systems are sending.
After the Monuments is proud to thank Team Henry Enterprises for their support of our show. Team Henry Enterprises is a Black-owned contracting firm specializing in office, retail, medical, multifamily, and higher education construction of all scopes and sizes. In the wake of the George Floyd protest, Team Henry is the very firm contracted by the city of Richmond to take down the Confederate monuments in Richmond and by many other municipalities to remove other Confederate monuments around Virginia and throughout the Southeast. Learn more about Team Henry and how they can help your community rebuild, renovate, or design at teamhenryent.com.
Here's something else that's disturbing to me as a layman and a journalist and not a lawyer. The rule of law seems under attack in America. And I look at some of the decisions that are coming out of the Supreme Court, and frankly, they don't seem to make a lot of sense. And from a legal standpoint, they seem more like political decisions than legal decisions. And you spoke of having to fight the same battles over and over again. We thought we'd won the voting rights battle. And the voting rights law is being deconstructed as we speak. And so I worry as the things we speak of find their way in the court, things that seem patently absurd to us, whether we're going to be dealing with arbiters who are calling from a legal standpoint rather than a political one. I mean, do you have concerns about the direction the courts are going? That's a long-winded way of asking.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you can do this work and not have like deep concerns about rulings of the Supreme Court and the voting rights, right? I mean, the sort of the litigation about voting rights, starting with Shelby County and the kind of erosion of those protections. I mean, right now we have a Supreme Court that has said pretty clearly that they are not going to protect the right of most folks to vote in any kind of serious way, right? And so it's concerning. It's deeply worrisome.
And I left out abortion here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. But I think what we've said at the ACLU is, we have to look at all the tools in the toolbox to change this, because it's, if ever we could count on the federal courts to protect, consistently protect the rights of sort of all of our citizens. If ever that was true, it certainly is no longer true. And so, we're investing we've got a team of litigators, but we've also got a team of lobbyists and kind of working on public education reports, right? Like we've said, we're not going to win this fight solely in the courts, right? We have to change hearts and minds. We have to have really kind of a across the board kind of wholesale, public discussion about who we want to be. And this fight is going to be won in the hearts and minds of the American people, right?
But how do we win the fight in the court of public opinion when all the propaganda arms that are, the effective propaganda arms seem to be on the right? There's no left wing equivalent to Fox News, for instance.
Right. That's a great question.
The think tanks.
Yes.
And the Republican Party, frankly, seems a lot more effective on its messaging. The right seems more effective in its messaging and in persuasion. How do people who care about the Constitution, the rule of law, and social justice win in the court of public opinion in America today?
Well, I'll say this. I think that something that gives me some hope, and I mean, everything you said is correct. There's a lot to be deeply concerned about. But things that give me hope is that, we from time to time do polling of the Virginia population, right? Of, Virginia voters. And we, read polls. And across the board, voters strongly support the right of women to have an abortion or not, right? That is, I mean, the data is pretty clear. Virginians support the right of people who have been convicted of felonies to be able to, sort of automatically get the right to vote. People support the right of students to learn accurate history and to check out the books that they want to check out, right? So I would say, looking at Virginia across the board, Virginians have some pretty good values. Virginians, have believe in the protection of civil rights and civil liberties. Now, does that show up every single time in every election? Obviously not, right? There's a lot to fight, but we need to mobilize kind of the populace to actually take action based on those beliefs. And I think it was really unfortunate that the message from this last election was that somehow we could seize on this like this school censorship message, and that would win elections. But I am not at all convinced that will win elections long term. I think that was, we had a year in which that succeeded as a message, but we're going to fight against that and see what Virginians really want in the long run.
The voice of the ACLU. How do people reach you or reach out to you? Or you all forward facing, finding the things that need to be taken to court from Virginians or citizens in general? I'm asking because the younger voice may not necessarily know exactly what the ACLU does. And so when we need to mobilize, how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, great question. People can go to our website, acluva.org. There's a link that you can click on to send us a message. I have a legal problem. We receive literally thousands of requests for assistance each year. A lot of those are from incarcerated people those folks generally send us kind of paper mail because it's hard to get access to a computer if they're incarcerated. But we receive online messages, we receive letters, and we read every single one of them. And that's how a lot of our cases come to us, is people saying, this thing happened to me, this thing happened to someone I know. Here's this policy our school board is pursuing, and and we want to hear from people. We want to know what's going on.
It seems like, to your point earlier, part of our job now is to align our politics and our political infrastructure with what the people want. I'm hearing this all the time now, that polls show substantial majorities of people want certain things, but that gerrymandering and our curious kind of setup of minority rule have canceled out the possibility, at least in the near term, of those things happening. So what do we do on that front to create an infrastructure that allows what the people want to actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And, I look at this in the context of abortion rights, right? So in 1973, there was a Supreme Court ruling. Roe v. Wade said women have a right to an abortion. And the far right really embarked on a 50-year plan to overturn that, right? Like a very dedicated, sort of committed effort to subvert the will of the American people, in the sense that this is a very popular policy that Americans overwhelmingly support the right to choose. And so I think folks on the other side really need to understand that this is not something we win quickly. This is a long-term fight, right? Because folks on the other side are deeply committed to trying to achieve certain outcome, whether that is, sort of a majority popular position or not. And we need to be in it for the long haul and to have that fight.
Mary, what are you excited about? What are some things that have been either won recently or you didn't have to take to court that that you all are proud about, whether that's, in the state of Virginia, but more so nationally as well?
Yeah, I'm excited about efforts to cut down on incarceration in Virginia, right? And I'm not saying we've made huge progress there, but I think we are building a bipartisan sort of consensus that Virginians lock up too many people and for way too long. And, we've seen like little bits of progress in this legislative session, but I do think we have both Democrats and Republicans talking about, for example, the number of years that people, get locked up for possession of drugs, and whether that's really a sensible policy, right? Particularly when people are experiencing addiction issues. And we're really hearing from Republicans the acknowledgement that, drug addiction is a mental health issue. It's a health issue. It's not should not be purely a criminal justice system. So I am optimistic that we are kind of on a path, not in 6 months or a year, but over time to really kind of rebuild the criminal legal system so that it is a more just and equitable system.
Just curious, the mask position, it's coming out of the legislature and the governor, basically saying school districts cannot mandate mask wearing. Is that, where does that square with the Americans with Disabilities Act for vulnerable children in classrooms, or even teachers for that matter?
Right. So as you know, the ACLU of Virginia brought a lawsuit on behalf of about a dozen kids and their parents, challenging both the sort of executive order and then later the bill that passed that prohibits schools from having a mask mandate. And we did that on behalf of kids who were medically vulnerable, for whom the mask mandate is absolutely a requisite for them to be able to go to school, right? And so there was a decision in a similar case some months back in South Carolina where the court said that a mask for an immunocompromised kid is basically like a ramp for a kid who uses a wheelchair. It is absolutely like the sort of access to the school systems. And our kids, the kids we're representing, are put in the position where they have to choose between, basically staying alive, staying healthy, and getting an in-person education. And that is just a choice that those kids should not have to make. And so, that's what our lawsuit says, basically, that the Americans with Disability Act, the 504 of the Rehab Act, those protect kids with disabilities, and schools, state law can't overturn those federal laws that require that those kids get protected. And I would say, shouldn't try to, right? Who is it that wants to pass a law to hurt children with cancer? What have we become that that we've got a politician standing up there and saying, I don't care if you have kids with cancer. I don't care if you have kids with, potentially fatal, illnesses. You can't protect them. That is just an unbelievably offensive guidance from our, state leaders, and that's what our case is about. And we've got a hearing coming up in the next 10 days or so, and we'll see what the court has to say about that.
As you know, Mary, Michael Paul writes a column every week at Richmond.com, and we are encouraging the audience to make sure that they subscribe to it so they can read what he's talking about. But Mary, how is the media, what's the media's role in helping ACLU get information? Sometimes we could be criticized for getting it right and getting it wrong. But what's the media's role in assisting you all in what you do? I
think, we may not agree about every matter and every issue. But I think the ACLU and certainly, Michael Paul Williams, like, we are committed to truth telling, right? We don't always get it right every single moment, but we are committed to telling a true story about who we are, and to talking honestly about the role of things like race both in Virginia history, but now when we talk about the right to vote amendment, the effort to restore the right to vote to people disenfranchised because they've been convicted of a felony, that is, you couldn't draw a clearer line from the racist 1902 Constitution to today, right? We are living with a law and a policy that is an absolute relic of Jim Crow law. And that's why people were disenfranchised, and that has not changed. So, we're telling that true story. And I think that's what the media does. I mean, that's what the media does. It tells true stories, tells uncomfortable stories, things that are sometimes disquieting, or that make us, recognize that ours is an imperfect, we have an imperfect history, but I think we share those goals.
Any final words, Michael Paul, as we wrap this up?
Well, I want to thank Mary and the ACLU for their work. Just seems like we're in a curious moment. I hear a lot of noise about my rights and my freedom. I want the freedom from getting a vaccine that might help stem a pandemic that's affecting everyone. I have my rights and my freedom not to wear a mask. But a lot of what we've talked about today is about repressing freedom, repressing rights.
Yeah.
The right to vote, the right the children might have to learn an honest history, the right of teachers to instruct without intimidation. So I'm seeing a lot of actions that contradict a lot of the noise that I'm hearing, and frankly, it ticks me off.
Mary Bauer, Executive Director of ACLU of Virginia. This is the After the Monuments podcast, Real Talk About Race with Michael Paul Williams and Kelli Lemon. Mary, once again, we thank you for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of After the Monuments. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcast. After the Monuments is a Virginia Video Network production and produced by Matt Pachilli, Michael Paul Williams, and me, Kelli Lemon. Technical direction and editing from Bill Barksdale. Executive production from Paul Farrell, Diane Salvatore, and Paige Mudd. Will Royer provides studio support. Our artwork is by Krishna Mathis. I'm Kelli Lemon, and we'll see you next week on After the Monuments.